Order. The question is that this House has considered road safety. Mr Matt Rodder.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The opposition welcomes this general debate on road safety. It's a chance to discuss the government's record. It's also well-timed, as last month the DFT published the 2017 road safety statistics. In recent months, Mr Speaker, there's been a healthy level of debate in Westminster Hall regarding road safety, and we've spoken on the fine work of the Bobby Colleran Trust and the effectiveness of Bobby zones around schools, global road safety, and the launch of influential reports recommending that the government change tack in regard to road safety. Therefore, we welcome today's debate in the Chamber. Mr Speaker, this country has a proud record of road safety and some of the safest roads in the world. In fact, Mr Speaker, we have the 4th lowest road deaths per million inhabitants, behind only Norway, Sweden and Switzerland. We rightly should be proud of this record. But whilst it's proper to say that Britain has one of the strongest road safety records in the world, we must also recognise that in recent years our record has stagnated. Ministers have said that the picture is mixed and generally heading in the right direction. We cannot be clearer, it isn't. It has stalled since 2010. The number of deaths on the road has remained around the same level since 2011, and one road death is an unacceptable tragedy, never mind almost 1,800 in 2017. As I've mentioned, Mr Speaker, the government recently published its 2017 figures for reported road casualties in Great Britain. Whilst there are some positives in this latest statistical release, there is also cause for concern, and ministers are, I believe, well aware of this. In 2017, 1,793 people were killed on our roads. That's an average of 5 people every day, 5 people a day. And just under 25,000 people were seriously injured. As the road safety charity Break point out, that is 73 people a day either being killed or seriously injured just going about their daily business. Last year was the highest annual total since 2011, and I'm sure we can all agree that this is completely unacceptable. There has been a sharp decline over decades in the number of people being killed or seriously injured on our roads. However, as I want to reiterate, the figures haven't really changed since 2010. Mr Speaker, the government talks a good game about road safety being a top priority, but I'm very sorry to say that their legacy so far is one of disappointment and indeed failure. The latest figures from the department only reaffirm this. Since 2010, progress has well and truly stalled. Another year of statistics have been published and we are no further forward. The government scrapped road targets, which successfully reduced the number of people killed or seriously injured by 1/3 under the last Labour government. The government tell me and the rest of the shadow transport team that targets don't achieve anything. We, however, disagree. The opposition believes that targets focus awareness and attention, and ultimately, Mr Speaker, they help hold the government to account. Mr Speaker, all the evidence points then to targets being a proven facilitator for achieving road safety improvement. Yet, there are no targets to assess progress. However, the government sets itself targets to meet in pretty much every other area of policy, but not for reducing road deaths and injuries. And I would like to ask ministers why this is the case. Ministers will be well aware that the Parliamentary Advisory Council for Transport Safety, PACTS, concluded in a recent report that the government should look into introducing key performance indicators for road safety in order to improve safety. In other words, they would like targets to be reintroduced. I want to, though, return to the 2017 figures and seek answers from ministers on a number of points. Worryingly, an estimated 9,040 people were killed or injured in drink drive incidents in 2016. This represents a rise of 7% from 2015 and is the highest number since 2012. The number of accidents where at least one driver or rider was over the alcohol limit rose by 6% in 2016, and I'd like to know what plans the government has to address this. I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
Mr. Alan Brown.
Thank him for giving way. Would he support measures to reduce the allowable drink drive limits in the manner that the SNP government's introduced in Scotland?
I think the honourable gentleman makes a very interesting point, and it's something which I believe should be looked at and reviewed across the UK as a whole. I'd like to move on to another aspect of this very important area, Mr. Speaker, if I may. The 2017 release also stated that the population of older people, aged 70 and older that is, has increased rapidly over recent years, and this carries implications for higher levels of casualty within this age group in the future. I'd like to ask ministers what they prepare to do to address this very specific issue, and I know the Minister touched on it, but then much more detail is needed. With an ageing population, this group of older road users could indeed become much more vulnerable in the future. At the other end of the age scale, Mr. Speaker, it's encouraging to hear that the overall number of child casualties of all severities decreased by 2% to 15,721, which is one of the lowest on record. However, I'm sure we can all agree that this remains far too high and that the government must strive to make our roads safer still, especially for vulnerable road users. Between 2010 and 2016, the number of deaths from road accidents remained broadly consistent, as we've heard. However, the number of pedestrians killed on our roads increased from 448... I will give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Does my honourable friend agree with me that far too many drivers of motor vehicles still seem to assume that they always take precedence, and that we need a fundamental change in attitude towards pedestrians and cyclists so that car and lorry drivers actually start treating non-drivers with respect?
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and I would like to agree with his suggestion. I think he makes a very interesting point. Returning to the wider point of vulnerable road users, although the number of cyclists killed on the roads in 2017 was slightly lower than 2016, the 101 deaths was very similar to levels seen since 2010. And looking at where these fatal accidents occurred, of the 1,793 road deaths in 2017, just over 1,000, or 60% of them, took place on country roads. A total of 626 occurred on urban roads, and 99 deaths took place on motorways. This is also a 2% increase since 2016. Whilst the number of people injured on motorways has decreased, there was a 6% increase in the number of deaths on motorways. And I would also like to ask the Minister what he plans to address this important and worrying statistic. Mr. Speaker, I would like to... I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm very, very grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. Does he share my concern that very often, particularly younger drivers, looking at car advertisements make them feel as if they're absolutely invincible, so safe have cars become according to the ads, that of itself can actually encourage people to drive in a less than sort of focused way, thinking that they're absolutely invincible to any form of injury?
I share the honourable gentleman's concern about younger drivers. I think that they are specifically vulnerable, and what is needed, arguably, is a better education programme. I'd like to return, Mr. Speaker, to my speech, my remarks. We do, on the Safer Roads Fund, we welcome this targeted approach in order to enable local authorities to improve the most dangerous stretches of A roads in England. The fund initially totalled £175 million, of which £100 million is currently being invested. However, the other £75 million originally allocated has been described as no longer required, according to the Minister. And I would like him to explain, I'd like the Minister, beg your pardon, to explain why the Department believes this to be the case. I found it very interesting that the RAC Foundation and the Road Safety Foundation recently published a report on the possible benefits of the Safer Road Fund, which estimates that it could prevent almost 1,400 deaths and serious injuries over the next 2 decades on these very risky A roads in England. And given the need to save lives and the evidence this fund makes a difference, surely it's important that we spend all the money in the fund. Hazardous A roads across England were denied funding to improve road safety for not being dangerous enough. The Transport Network has also asked the Department for Transport what will happen to this money. And again, I would urge the Minister to reply on this point later. The Minister was also asked about regulations for tyre safety by my colleague, the Honourable Member for York Central, in May during the passage of the Haulage and Permits Bill. He replied that the government had a process in mind, having acknowledged that this is a serious issue, and this is the issue, Mr. Speaker, of the up to 20-year-old tyres which have been causing great concern. In my own area in the Thames Valley, there was a horrific accident in Hampshire a few years ago. So I would also like the Minister, if he may, if he can, in his closing remarks, to respond on this point and where the government has got to on this important issue. We're also on this side concerned about enforcement, particularly as there's been a 24% fall in the number of traffic officers since 2012, sadly part of the government's austerity programme. There was no mention in the recent budget of extra money for regular policing, and since the Conservatives came to power, 21,000 police officers have had their posts cut. In 2010, indeed, there were 3,500 police officers patrolling the UK roads, but by 2017, this had fallen to just 2,600. It seems that the government cuts to our vital services are putting safety at risk. Austerity isn't over, despite repeated claims from the government and the Prime Minister, and it's affecting all areas, including road safety. 2 years ago, the Transport Select Committee produced its Road Traffic Law Enforcement Review, and it concluded, as the number of traffic officers has fallen, so too has the number of road traffic offences being detected. However, the number of causing death offences has not fallen, and this suggests, I'm quoting from the committee, this suggests the reduction in overall offences recorded does not represent a reduction in offences being committed. As I said, the latest road safety figures show there has been an increase in the number of deaths of pedestrians and motorcyclists. The number of cyclists killed has remained broadly constant since 2010, and I also would like to ask the Minister to address this issue in his closing remarks. The Department for Transport, as he said, are currently undertaking a cycling and walking investment review strategy. The review, I believe, is to be welcomed, especially the inclusion of pedestrians. So I would also ask the Minister, who will know that my shadow ministerial brief covers cycling and walking, how he will ensure that this review achieves safer walking and cycling in line with the cycling and walking strategy's ambitions. We welcome the government's recent announcement of plans to revise the Highway Code rules relating to pedestrians and cyclist safety, as campaigned for by many charities and cycling and walking groups, and I hope that the government will listen to the sector's concerns, which include speed limits, use of mobile phones, rules on how much space the close passing he talks about, HGVs and other vehicles should leave when overtaking cyclists, and also indeed how to open car doors safely when carrying out this review. Mr. Speaker, in summary, in our 2017 manifesto, Labour pledged to reset the UK's road safety vision and to ambitiously strive for a transport network with zero deaths, reintroducing road safety targets and setting out bold measures to continuously improve road safety standards. A future Labour government, Mr. Speaker, would introduce a target zero approach to deaths on the roads, a new approach to road safety that does not accept road deaths and injuries are inevitable. Beyond the obvious benefits to families and society, this policy brings significant financial benefit from avoiding NHS bills, care bills, the cost of transport delays, and the cost of lost earnings in production. So could I ask the Minister, when will the government commit to this type of target zero approach? Finally, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to close by saying that although we have one of the safest road networks in the world, which should be celebrated, we should never, ever be complacent.